Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're actually going to completely transform how we think about carbohydrates. We're moving way beyond just tracking a simple dietary macro, and we're going to look at the most abundant and, frankly, the most complex biomolecules in nature. Let's face it, carbs get a pretty oversimplified, sometimes even negative rap in popular culture, right? But together, we're going to reframe that entirely and uncover the absolutely beautiful science that actually keeps our bodies running. So here's our roadmap for today. We're kicking things off with Section 1, the ultimate biological fuel, then moving into regulating blood sugar, checking out the glycolysis engine, going beyond just simple sugars, and finally, decoding the incredibly complex glycan language.
All right, let's just dive right into Section 1, the ultimate biological fuel. To start us off, we really have to ask ourselves, are these molecules just simple energy sources, or is there a much deeper biological story here? It is so incredibly easy to just glance at a nutrition label and see carbs as just, a number to count. But the structural reality of what's happening inside you is far more compelling than that.
The reality is that carbohydrates are elegantly composed of literally just three elements: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But they are actually the most abundant biomolecules in nature. Following a surprisingly simple empirical formula, these molecules act as the literal foundation for life on Earth. They are doing so much more than just giving you a quick sugar rush.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 2, regulating the blood sugar. Because these molecules are such a massively potent fuel, our physiological systems have to handle them with absolute precision. And the stakes here are incredibly high. A massive drop in your blood sugar can rapidly lead to lethargy, a coma, or even permanent brain damage. Normally, our bodies maintain a really tight range, usually about 60 to 90 milligrams per deciliter. When glucose drops below that baseline, your body doesn't just feel hungry, it actually enters a state of sheer panic. It starts dumping epinephrine and cortisol because, well, your brain relies almost exclusively on this highly specific fuel to survive. So to prevent that dangerous crash, your pancreas steps in with this brilliant mechanism. Glucose actually enters the pancreatic beta cell through something called a GLUT2 transporter to trigger a vital biological response. Think of this GLUT2 transporter as a highly specialized doorway. As glucose concentration rises in your bloodstream, it just flows right through this door. And once it's inside, the cell immediately gets to work converting it into ATP, which is essentially the cell's internal energy currency. Now, what's fascinating is how this cellular cascade breaks down into a perfect chain reaction. First, membrane depolarization opens up calcium channels, which then results in the vital secretion of insulin. Basically, that rising ATP we just talked about literally closes potassium channels, which alters the cell's electrical charge. That depolarization forces these voltage-gated calcium channels to just swing wide open. And that sudden rush of calcium, that's the final crucial push the cell needs to dump its stored insulin directly into your bloodstream. And this is where it all comes together. That secreted insulin acts like a literal key for your muscle cells. It unlocks the GLUT4 transporters so glucose can safely enter the cell and stabilize your bloodstream. When insulin docks with the cell's receptor, it sends an urgent signal to these little vesicles hidden deep inside the cell. Those vesicles, which are packed with glucose transporters, travel up to the surface and fuse with the membrane. Suddenly, the cell has all the open doors it needs to pull that glucose out of your blood into the muscle, elegantly bringing your blood sugar right back down to normal.
Now that the glucose is safely inside the cell, let's look at Section 3, the glycolysis engine. This is exactly how the cell breaks down this ultimate biological fuel. Okay, please do not try to memorize these structures. Instead, just take a second to gaze at the sheer scale and complexity of this 10-step ATP investment and earnings engine. It's an absolute masterclass in metabolic regulation. The cell actively invests energy up front during the first stage, tweaking and modifying that glucose molecule over and over again. It's doing this strategically so that in the second stage, it can cash in on a much larger energy reward, ultimately breaking the glucose down into pyruvate.
Now, fuel is just one chapter of the story, so let's zoom in further for Section 4, beyond just simple sugars. This categorization maps our biological protagonists into three really distinct groups. We've got simple sugars like glucose, complex polysaccharides like cellulose, and these incredibly structurally diverse glycoconjugates. While simple sugars are busy powering our cells, we have massive homopolymers, which, by the way, are just really long chains of the exact same sugar, like glycogen, that allow us to store that energy for later. And then you have glycoconjugates, where sugars are physically attached to proteins or lipids on the cell surface.
that opens up an entirely different universe of cellular function.
To really understand how they connect, we have to look at the anomeric carbon. This acts as the crucial anchor point for forming glycosidic bonds between these molecules. When a carbohydrate forms its cyclic ring structure, this specific carbon becomes the active site. It basically dictates exactly how it's going to link up with its neighboring sugars to build out those massive complex chains. A great example of this is comparing lactose to sucrose. We can easily see why lactose is considered a reducing sugar that's capable of chemical reactions. It still has an available anomeric carbon left completely free. But over on the sucrose side, that's your common table sugar, the glucose and fructose molecules are completely locked together at both of their anomeric carbons. There's no free anomeric carbon left to oxidize. It's absolutely wild how one tiny, microscopic linkage difference completely changes the entire chemical behavior of the sugar. Finally, we're zooming all the way down to the atomic level for Section 5, decoding the glycan language. This is hands down one of the most cutting-edge areas of glycobiology right now. You see, because glycans lack a predictable linear template like DNA, scientists have to use these colorful, standardized symbols just to map out the incredibly complex branch structures that dictate cellular signaling. With DNA, you have a straightforward, straight-line code, but sugars, they can branch off in multiple different directions. So researchers adopted these shapes, think blue circles for glucose, yellow circles for galactose, just to be able to visualize these sprawling, tree-like molecular structures. To truly wrap your head around this structural complexity, consider this comparison. A hexanucleotide of DNA gives you about 4,000 combinations. A hexapeptide of amino acids, that gets you to 64 million. But glycans, they operate on an entirely different scale. Because unlike DNA and proteins, they aren't forced to be linear. This staggering truth is that a chain of just 6 sugar units, a single hexaoligosaccharide, can literally have billions of possible arrangements. It creates a biological zip code of absolutely unparalleled density. Because they can link at different carbon numbers, branch outward, and face entirely different chemical directions, their structural diversity is just astronomical. And this allows your cells to use these dense little sugar trees on their surfaces to identify and communicate with one another in incredibly specific, nuanced ways. So I'll leave you with this final mind-bending thought for your next meal. If human babies lack the enzymes to digest complex milk oligosaccharides, isn't it incredible that their microscopic bacterial flora step in to unlock this biological code for them? Think about that. The mother is literally producing complex carbohydrates not to feed her baby directly, but to feed and cultivate the baby's vital microbiome. It just goes to show you, carbohydrates are so much more than just a simple dietary macro. They are the complex, largely misunderstood protagonists of our biology. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this sparks a brand new curiosity about the invisible molecular world inside you.